Abby and I'm now actually a final year medical student at the University of Birmingham. In today's episode, we're going to be covering abstract reasoning. Now, for those of you who have sadly never heard of this before, this is the part of the UCAT where you try to figure out patterns between shapes and arrows and all things strange. Now, the reason why it's me doing this is because back in my day, I think 2015, when I sat the UCAT, I scored 870 in abstract reasoning, and the highest is 900 and the lowest is 300. I know, why on earth did they do that? But anyway, so I don't know exactly how many questions I got right, but I got more right than wrong, definitely. So anyway, abstract reasoning, the reason why UCAT think it's a good way of deciphering who should or shouldn't get into medical school is, this is their logic, not mine, I promise, that doctors need to identify different patterns and help decide what diagnosis to give a patient based on a system of patterns and recognition. So they've decided to mimic this with shapes. The link is tenuous, but you know, we'll still roll with it. So today I'm going to be talking through how to hopefully confidently ace abstract reasoning. So let's break abstract reasoning down. So as I've mentioned before, it's used to try and assess your spatial awareness and pattern recognition. Now, the way that they do this is that it is the fourth part of the UCAT and it is 55 questions long. Now, it's made up of 13 question sets and you have 13 minutes to answer all of the abstract reasoning. Now, that might sound time pressured, so that is 1 minute per question set. However, you've got to think of it as you'll spend, a few, maybe half a minute figuring out the question set, figuring out what pattern links them together, and then you just absolutely smash through the actual subtypes of the questions because you've already done the hard work. So the time does balance out, but you will spend more time at the start of the minute figuring it out, but then you don't need a lot of time to try and pop A, B, or neither sort of in there. Now, if we go over the first type of question, so there are 4 types of question, and the first one is that you get given 2 sets, set A and set B. Now, there's a similarity between every single box in set A. There will of course be lots of other things in each box to try and confuse you, and they're called distractors. So sometimes you will think the distractor is the main focus, but the distractor will not be present in each box, which means that it is not the principal focus of set A. And usually set A and set B are common things together. For example, if set A, all the arrows point to the top left-hand corner, in set B, they might all point downwards. And the thing that you need to try and figure out is whether or not it is simply just a one rule issue or if there's a second rule. So, for example, if in set A everything points, all the arrows point to the top left-hand corner, it might be that if there is a black square, then the arrow is at the bottom, but it still points to the top left-hand corner. This is not always the case, but sometimes they do have 2 rules within each set. And that is question 1 done. So now let's move on to the second type of question that you can get in the abstract reasoning section. So this is a series of shapes. By this, I mean that we have a series of about 4 boxes which all have something in common, as in they progress. Hopefully it will be much more easy to understand this type of question when we do a worked example. But as I've mentioned before, it is a group of boxes that have something in common that are progressively changing. So we call this a series. So this is a question in which you have to decide which box fits the series. And that is question type 2. Now, the third type of question in abstract reasoning that you might come across, what you will come across, but that you might identify, is a statement box. So it will say, you'll have an image here and it will say, this image is to image 2 as image 3 is to blank. So you've got to identify what links the first image to the second image, and then use the third image to help you guide what would be the same pattern or the same similarity in box 4. For example, on the UCAT website, when I was doing some practice examples to jog my memory, one of these statement questions that they had was a box which had four squares, 4 dartboards on each corner, and in the top left-hand dartboard it was 3 shapes, and that dartboard is to the second dartboard by the similarity that each shape moves out 1 circle. So I then knew, okay, so for my test sample, the top left-hand dartboard needs to be 1 colour out. So that's the pattern for that one. And then I figured out another dartboard, I think it was the bottom left-hand corner as well. The similarity between that one was that the colours were going in 1 circle. So once you've identified at least 2 similarities within those boxes, you can use the third box to match up with the test sample. So really the statement is not useful at all, but it helps them have a different type of question. But you just need to identify the similarities between the top 2 boxes and use that example to help you guide your answer for the third one. Finally, we've got question type 4. Now, this is similar to question 1, but it's a little bit different, and I'll explain why. So, question type 4 is that you've got set A and set B once again. So it's a similar type of question, and we're going to go through the similar sort of things to look for, the similar patterns to identify. But the way that this is different to question 1 is, in question 4, what we've got is the question tells you which of these boxes fits in set A. So they will tell you, okay, we only care about set A in this one question. And then you've got 4 different sample boxes to pick from. And if you remember back to question type 1, you get a picture and it will say, which does this belong to? A, B, or neither? So that's a slight difference. So the same sort of principles apply for 1 and 4, the same sort of thinking and abstract reasoning will go into that. But the only difference is that in 4, the question will dictate whether you're focusing on set A or set B, and that is all. Okay? So that is our breakdown of the types of questions. We're next going to move on to the common patterns that you need to sort of try and get on board with, and the things that you should be doing in practice to help you ace that abstract reasoning. So we've covered each question type and the basic principles around each one. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a deep dive into each type of question and how you can start getting the knack of the question types. Okay? Now, if you remember correctly, type 1 is the question type where you have set A and set B, and you'll have sample answers, and you must say whether it belongs to set A, B, or neither. Now, with this type of question, I would strongly advise you start by practicing without a timer. I advise that for all types of UCAT questions, especially at the beginning, to help you get to know the questions and ease you in. The last thing we want is you getting upset and worried by how quickly you need to move. But as you start progressing and practicing more and more, you'll find that the timing really comes naturally to you. So, what I suggest is at the start, you collate a list, one that we have on our UCAT ebook, and search around and have that next to you whilst you're practicing the UCAT questions, specifically abstract reasoning. Now, the reason why I say this is because each year there are a small sample pool of things, of patterns, of rules that they use in the abstract reasoning to help decipher whether it's set A or set B or neither. And now, if we have this list, then you can hopefully each practice session use that list to help whittle down whether or not one of those rules is in front of you. And the more and more you practice like this, the more you'll sort of remember the basic list of rules that you might be presented with in your actual UCAT. So now, some common rules that they use, or some things that I want you to make sure that you look out for when you're practicing, is how many objects are in the box, how many vertices are in each box, are there any lines of symmetry and do they match up in the boxes? For example, in set A, does every box have at least 3 lines of symmetry, and in set B, do they only have 2 lines of symmetry? Okay, where are there any arrows and which direction are they facing? Count how many sides are in each box. Have a look at whether or not certain shapes are coloured, for example, white, grey or black. Some other rules that we have on our UCAT ebook, make sure you go and have a look at those. But other ones, for example, would be, are any of the shapes in each box repeated and move around? If you feel like you're getting stuck and you're looking at these boxes and these shapes and you really can't figure it out, and you've got your list alongside you and it's nothing on that list, then what I did in my actual UCAT exam was I leaned in forward and then I leaned back and I stayed back and I tried to completely wipe my brain and see if there were any patterns. Okay, so give yourself a bird's eye view, look at different angles. I know it sounds really silly, but it gets your mind in a different headspace thinking, okay, completely new set of questions, I'm a bit stuck, let's look at it from a different angle, and you might see actually that there is something else going on there. And something else to remember is that sometimes they have more than one rule within a box. So I'm always an advocate for, you found one rule and then you look at the answers and see whether or not it matches. If it matches but it doesn't feel quite right, look for a second rule. So it could be that in set A there are 3 lines of symmetry in each box, but if there's a circle then there's always a triangle shaded black, okay? So that's a conditional rule, so if there's a triangle, or sorry, if there's a circle, the triangle is shaded black. Now, what we say is, what we recommend from We Are Medics, if you cannot find the second rule or you're struggling for time, you've only just found this rule, don't worry too much about that second rule, because you'll probably get at least 3 out of the 5 questions right just off the main rule. So remember, don't spend all of your time trying to figure out what the set is. You can always flag the option and go back. So that is question type 1 covered. Now let's talk about how to ace question type 2 in abstract reasoning. So if you remember, question type 2 is a series of shapes where there is a progression of a rule. Now, our advice is to focus on one feature within the box and see how that progresses throughout the series. For example, if there is a black shape within each box, start with the first black shape in that box and see what happens to it as the series progresses. And then do that with the next feature that you can see. That way you save a bit of time as you try and identify from one feature what that pattern is. Sometimes when you look at the whole box, you might get a little bit confused because there seems like a lot of things that are going on. What we also advise is looking out for key patterns. So again, make a list specifically for question type 2. Although some of the things will be the same as question type 1 rules, the thing that might be slightly different in question type 2 is that the pattern sometimes goes up in even numbers. So for example, the sides increase by +2 on each go. So you've got 2 sides, then 4 sides, then 6 sides. Be wary of alternating patterns. For example, sometimes they'll have a different number of vertices, for example. So there's only 1 vertex in box 1, there are 3 in box 2, there are 2 in box 3, and there are 4 in box 4. Okay, so try and see a pattern going on there and have a list in your head. Secondly, again, some of these patterns will be very obvious and very easy to straight away, and that's brilliant because you want to be going through some questions faster, which allows you to have more time on different questions which could be a bit trickier. Now, with type 2, I personally find it a little bit easier than in type 1 because naturally you get given 4 boxes to try and make a link as to what's going on next. And as we've mentioned before, there are almost fewer rules than can be in the first one. So, for example, it could be that you've got a set of 4 shapes in a diamond shape, and each box they rotate by 90 degrees. Now that is a nice and simple progression that you can see hopefully from afar, but even if not, use our rule of identifying one feature and following it throughout the progression. So that is question type 2 covered and completed. Check. Let's get stuck into how we absolutely boss question type 3 in abstract reasoning. Now, question type 3 is where you have a statement which links 2 images together, and then you're left with one statement half finished and you must select the matching answer. So with this one, all the answers are contained within a row. And what we recommend is focusing on 3 things. So colour, shape and position. The thing is, because they're quite closely matched and linked, on the answers you might find that they're very similar. So it's really important that in this question type you double check your answer, because it could just be that instead of a black circle within a white and a grey, the colours are slightly mixed up and you accidentally get yourself muddled up. So try and see if there's something that obviously doesn't fit the pattern that you have spotted and eliminate that. And that is something that we recommend you do with each type of question. Always eliminate answers that you can. On the UCAT website, there's a function to cross it out when you want to, and then you can cross it back in if you need to. But that's always really useful, and I always recommend doing that because it means that you're not distracted by that answer if you are certain it's wrong. Okay? So, for example, let's use colour. Is it that box A is linked to box B by each of the colours rotating out one circle? For example, if you've got white in the middle, grey on the ring outside, and then black on the furthest ring out, is it A that's linked to B because the black has moved in, the grey has moved out, and the white has moved out? Okay, so that's quite a common pattern that you might see, alongside other things, but that could be one of them. Shape. So is it that all the shapes have been flipped by a line of symmetry? Or is it that the shapes with odd indices have swapped over or been replaced by a shape with another odd index? Position. So with positioning, it could be that every square has been rotated by 90 degrees within that box, but everything else has stayed the same and you've got overlapping shapes. Or it could be that the whole box has been rotated 180 degrees and the arrow has been flipped. So it's very important to focus on those 3 things. So that is colour, shape and position. So that, guys, is question type 3 done and dusted. So guys, finally we're on question type 4 of abstract reasoning. Now this is ever so slightly different to type 1, but very much similar. So you'll get the question will say, does this belong to set A? Or sorry, which of these boxes belongs to set A? And then you've got to select one that fits A or B. They will guide you to which one they want you to focus on. So it's different to type 1, which is, it says which category does this picture belong to. So you get more pictures, you get options of pictures in subset 4 questions. Okay, so going back to what we've said for the previous question types, make sure you've got that list of common patterns, common rules, and utilize that for this question type 2. So everything you've been working on for 1, 2 and 3, do the same things for type 4 and you'll boss it, okay? So that is our deep dive into the 4 types of question. Now what I'm going to do is give you advice for the abstract reasoning and for preparation. So let's talk about how we're going to prepare for this exam, for this subtype, okay? As I've mentioned before, make sure you've got this list, and each time you're working on questions, when you look at the answer, try and identify the rule, but also check up on it. If it's a rule that you don't have on your list, jot it down. Make sure you're constantly topping up this little list of absolute gold that you've written, okay? And make sure that you practice it. So when you come to the next abstract reasoning question, check every single one of your rules. Does it match? Does it not? Okay. If it doesn't match, then do the bird's eye view, have a look at different angles, see if you can find out what it is. As I mentioned before, don't time yourself at the start. This goes for all questions in the UCAT because it does not help at the beginning to time yourself. You're only going to make yourself feel upset and pressured that you don't think you can do this. That's what I did. I think I timed myself in the first week or two just out of interest, I said to myself, and I got really upset thinking I'm never going to do well in this exam because I couldn't finish half the questions. So what I suggest is at the start, at the very beginning, at least for a week, try and get through all of these lists in each question type, but do it at a good pace. So don't spend 30 minutes checking all the indices. Do it at a good pace, okay? But make sure you get through the whole list. Don't put a timer on, it's not worth it just yet. As you start building confidence and seeing more questions, you will remember that list much better and you will get faster and faster at identifying these patterns. Now for the actual exam, we say if you can't suss out the rule in 45 seconds, flag it and move on. Because time is very precious in this exam, and if you can't identify a pattern, it's better to utilize that time more in the next question and try and get that time back so that at the end you can go over your flagged questions. Okay. Now, what else we would recommend you to do is, as you start seeing more and more questions, turn that list over and all the rules that you've been using should be starting to become second nature to you. Now, another thing to remember is the only questions that in theory accurately represent the UCAT level are those off the UCAT's website. Okay, so with other question types, so whether you've found a book with questions or you're using a free question bank, remember, if you find the questions really difficult, a lot of people have said that questions that they've used from books and from sources are more difficult, specifically abstract reasoning, than those from the UCAT's actual exam base. So try not to get disheartened if you find questions very difficult, but do learn from them, because different resources will have maybe different rules that will then get you thinking about them in the actual exam. Okay, so some final bits of advice are: make sure that you pace yourself as you get closer and closer to the exam until you feel ready to time yourself. And again, don't put a timer on for 45 seconds thinking, "Ooh, I must move on now." Make sure you get into the feel of it so you know roughly how much time that you need to be spending on a question, and if you can't, take an educated guess. So what we advise, for example, for question 1 or question 4, where there are 2 sets, zoom out and look at it as a whole and try and compare, see if you can find that pattern. But if you can't, that's no worry,
All you need to do now is try and see which of those boxes looks most similar to set A or set B, okay? Try and identify some link, and if not, use your gut instinct, because there's a chance that you could be right, and that chance is better than not putting an answer down at all. So guys, thank you ever so much for listening to our Abstract Reasoning UCAT course video, and hopefully you've absolutely smashed this by the end of when you've watched it and you feel very much more confident. We really recommend using our ebook alongside these videos in your practice preparation run-up, especially before your exam, and hopefully that means that you'll get really confident and really well rehearsed in these questions and you'll absolutely smash it. Please let us know if there's anything you'd like us to change or any other feedback, and we'd like to make this bigger and better for next year. But good luck, you all will do great because you're right here, you're doing that work, and I'm very proud of you. Bye guys!